In the Huddle was created to give student athletes, parents and coaches an inside look at the journey through US college sport and all that comes with it. The demands, the experiences, the excitement and the opportunities available to our student athletes from around the world. Study and Play USA facilitates a comprehensive, customised approach for student athletes and families for their whole journey, from their high school preparation years right through to US college graduation.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Study and Play USA podcast in the Huddle. Today, I'm very excited to be speaking with Debbie Shively. So Debbie is the founder of Internationally Educated, which is a Sydney-based company that does what Study and Play USA does for students in Australia, but just without the sporting side, really helping students find their right fit academically and holistically, through the admissions process in the US. So Debbie's career includes being the assistant director of admissions at Menlo College, the business school of Silicon Valley in Atherton, California. She's volunteered at Education USA through the US State Department and the US Consulate whilst undertaking her Masters in International Studies at the University of Sydney. So Debbie has worked in both Australian and US universities in admissions, marketing and operations, and has worked in essentially the international education field for over 17 years. And as a part of this, she reviews, admissions and reads thousands of students' applications for admissions. So essentially, Debbie is a wealth of knowledge for the US college admissions process. And so welcome, Debbie. It's so great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
No problem. Well, you and I, we talk often and bouncing ideas off each other, talking about different challenges within the admissions, space in the US. And so I'm actually going to not assume, I suppose, that our listeners understand what being a part of an admissions department in the US means, So, generally speaking, what is the role of the admissions department in US colleges? It seems, from my experience in this industry, it's far more holistic, the role that you take in as admissions officer. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you, someone who's done this before, what that looks like.
Yeah, great. So the admissions role, it's multifaceted. So a lot of it, and I guess it will vary at different institutions, so different U.S. universities. But one of the key components was going out into the field and recruiting students. So it was going to the high schools, doing presentations, doing expos. So really being in contact with those students. And then back in the office, you would be reviewing the student applications. So it's a much more holistic application process. So it's multifaceted and includes a number of different components, which I'm sure we'll get to in a bit. So it would be reviewing the student's application for admission, kind of referencing, have I met with the student previously? Do I have any other information about this student? Looking at our database to see if they had expressed interest. So, and that is going to be an important part at some institutions. At others, it might not be, and it's called demonstrated interest. So kind of having a look at the application itself, looking at the essay, looking at the letters of recommendation, looking at their marks from years 9, 10, 11, 12, looking at an SAT score. When I was in admissions, it was still a requirement, which is now a test optional landscape at the moment. So looking at all of those components, deciding if that student was admissible for our institution, and making notes on that, and then taking that file to the admissions committee meeting. So representing those international students that had applied from all across the globe to the institution in which I was working, and then saying, okay, advocating for that student. I think the student's a good fit. They've demonstrated this. Or maybe I don't think the student's a great fit because of this, and this. Or, maybe we should consider a conditional offer if they pull up their marks in year 12, or, kind of whatever it is. It's definitely a collaborative process. It's not just one person looking at the application and saying, yep, definitely in. So it's a collaborative process throughout the admissions team. And each institution is going to be reading applications differently. But most of the time they'll do it in a team basis, or at the very least, it will be a committee.
Yeah, right. And that, to me, that's so different, from being I went to university here in Australia, and I think it's sending in some paperwork and your marks, and that's kind of it, and so that's really different for us Aussies, to get our heads around that as the process, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of times when I'm speaking to students and families, I say it's almost the inverse of the application process here. So the process here, it's all done within the school, whereas the process, obviously, your transcripts in the US are going to be done within the school, but the SAT is an external test, or the ACT. So the domestic students in America go through the exact same application process as international students do. So it's not as though because you don't go to school in the US, you're needing to go through an additional application process. It's the same thing, and it's the same holistic approach, and the same pieces of the application are required. So it's much more of, holistic application review. With the students with the universities wanting to know, outside of class, we know that your marks are quite high, but outside of class, what kind of a person are you? And we would pull that information from the essay, the activities list, the honors. So what does the student do with their time outside of school? What, are they in leadership roles, or, what sort of interests do they have?
Yeah. And that's, I do love that about the American system, is that they're looking at that whole person. I know that I do love it, sort of some of the Ivy League colleges, which that's the majority of what Australians have heard of, as the Ivy League is, that with their financial aid scenario, it's, if you're the right fit for this university, we don't want the financial side of it to be what's stopping you from coming to this, this campus, this institution, and adding tremendous value. I love that, about the system. They're trying to get the right fit and the right culture for what, and that's what you see on each university's website. They have their mission statement, their key values, of what sort of environment they're trying to create.
Yep. Yes, exactly. It's, they're looking at more than just the marks. What are you going to contribute to the campus? They're what's your fit? Which institution is going to be your best fit?
Yeah.
And, sometimes I work with students that are saying, oh, we're going to apply to all of the Ivies, where in fact, there's only 8 Ivy League institutions, but they are quite different from each other.
Yes.
So a candidate that would find one institution of interest might not actually be successful at the other one because it's quite different.
Yes.
So it's really important to look into, what is it you're finding, and kind of going back to that whole right fit. Why do you think you would be a good fit at that institution? And then that's your opportunity through all of the different pieces of the application to demonstrate that.
Yes.
To the admissions team. In saying that, marks are always going to lead the way. So, they are going to look at what you do outside of class, extra co-curricular leadership, all of those types of things, but marks are always going to lead the way. So they're always going to be the most critical piece, because at the end of the day, the admissions teams, and I speak from experience in sitting on the other side and reviewing these applications, you need to prove to the admissions team that you will be successful on their campus, that academically you will be successful, that you will contribute to their campus. So, multifold is not only will you be successful from an academic point of view, but also that you're going to contribute. So, maybe you're into a particular group or club or, robotics or whatever it is, but you're going to add value beyond just the academic discussions.
And, I am going to talk a lot in this podcast about the key differences, between whether it's Australian high school and American high school, or the admissions process to university here in Australia and the US, because, as Australians, we can often only know what we know, right? And be familiar with that. But in the US system, if I think about the Australian system and try and apply what you're saying, to the US system here, why that's different, or why it maybe wouldn't work as well, and maybe some of our listeners wouldn't know this or think about this, is that in the US, you're living on campus. Rarely do any Americans go to college in their hometown. Everyone's away from home. So you're living, on campus or nearby in this community for 4 years. Whereas here, a lot of times, the student can still live at home, I did, or through uni. Why would I move? I want to get meals cooked for me and my washing done and all of those things. So that is why I think it's so different. It is a whole community that you're all living, breathing, and being a part of for those 4 years.
Yep, absolutely. So the residential living piece is critical in the U.S. university experience. So that is kind of reinstating what you said, is the majority of students do not live with their family during their university years in America. And regardless of kind of how close they are, it's still that residential living. And we talk about kind of that holistic education that you'll also get. And that's a lot of what you're going to learn by living with your classmates and, doing study groups at 11 o'clock at night because everybody's living in the same dorms. And, even that opportunity of learning to live with other people and work with people that aren't necessarily like-minded and those types of things, that it's really the in-classroom learning, of course, which is the academic learning that you're going to take away from the classroom, but it's also the networking connections and the residential living and the ability to work with others and all of those things that kind of make up the whole of the US education system. So it's very much founded on that. Obviously, very high level of academics, but equally the residential living that is across most institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we touched on it earlier, is that you said, what international students are doing, from an admissions perspective, same as American high school students. Okay. However, we are on the other side of the world. We have a different academic calendar year, curriculum. So if we're talking timing, right, when should, in your experience, when should a student who's looking to go and study in America, when should they start exploring this? Because, ultimately in my experience, you do need to be ahead of the game, because you've got 350 million Americans that they've been working towards this process, like work towards our ATAR, right? And you know about it from a very young age. In America, you're working towards going to college, and
Right.
you've got all those applications lined up and things like that. So talk me through the difference in timings and what you find.
Yep. So the application review at most institutions in the US, so keep in mind there's over 4,000 degree granting institutions. So one of the complexities of the application system is that there is not an overarching application system similar to the UAC as we have here. So each institution might have different application requirements, different inclusions. They might have different review period of when they would review your application from.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, most institutions will do an academic review from years 9, 10, 11, and 12.
Yeah.
Because that's when we start high school in year 9. And so that academic review would be all of the courses that you've sat, all of the courses in high school that you've sat, all of the associated marks on the semester and year mark tally, I suppose, depending on how your school reports. So the earlier you start, the better. The U.S. kids, as you said, are going to be looking at years 9. In year 9, they know that their performance is going to be reviewed.
Yes.
So they're ready for that.
Yeah.
Ideally, we would start working with students in year 10, and that's really just so that we can plan a proactive strategy on how best to position their application, what things they might want to consider including. It's not to say that if you get to year 11 or year 12 even that you can't do it. It's just creating a different type of a strategy based on what you have accomplished rather than directing you in terms of what you might consider accomplishing.
Yes.
So kind of the earlier the better is always the rule of thumb within US uni admissions. And again, keeping in mind that they're going to start the review process at most institutions starting at year 9.
Yes. And that's I always get excited when we're speaking with, for our perspective, for what we do, Australian student athletes in year 9, even in year 8, it's too early to get to the process in year 8, but what we can share with them about, we're so senior focused here in the in Australia in 2012, and sometimes year 9 and 10 can just be, this practice years.
Yes.
Really just getting ready for 11 and 12. But from an American point of view, what you do in year 9 and 10 is equally as important in year 11 and 12.
Right.
So just knowing that the grades in year 9 and 10 have such a huge impact on which is your grade point average. So that's
Mhm.
American system of measuring your academic level through high school. It can just have such an impact on that. Regardless of whether you decide to pursue this pathway or not, like if you just know that and keep it an option to maximize your opportunity, it's just critical.
Yes, that's right. And I would say students that work with like an independent educational counselor, similar to my role in the US, they would probably start working with someone at year 9 because they know that the process starts at the review process is going to start in year 9.
Yes.
In saying that, they won't always start working with somebody in year 9, but they would also have probably a more their careers advisor, their college counselor at their high school is going to be more versed in the US process, obviously, because they're going to be located in the US. So if they don't even start engaging somebody to work with them externally on their applications, mentally, they would already have their eye on the ball of like 9,
Yes.
10, so,
Yeah.
and, it's not unheard of that people in year 8 in America would start working with external counselor, because a lot of times, even though it starts in year 9, 10, 11, and 12, it's kind of getting those courses positioned so that you can then take the most competitive, academically competitive curriculum starting in year 9. So that means, you've got to be doing well in year 8 to then be academically competitive.
Yeah, right. And I was actually saying to you earlier before we jumped on the podcast, and I think it's worth mentioning now, Claire from our team, just hearing a different perspective from Claire, where she went to high school in America and then went to university here in Australia. But she went through the recruiting process as a soccer player whilst in high school in the US. And she said to me, Alexia, do you know, I had an entity such as, internationally educated or Study and Play USA, helping me through the process. And she said, I was living in the country, like I am in the system, I am a part of it, but still needed someone to be able to help navigate that, right? It's a complex process. And I thought, well, that, to be honest, I'd never really thought about it from, what Americans needed for the process. I always assumed because we live on the other side of the world and we're trying to, our system and their system is
different.
That makes sense. But it makes even more sense that it's required here, because if Americans are needing it, then, absolutely, Australian students.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's like even students that are in, daily in the system living in America, and, their parents may have gone through US universities, there's a brother or sister, they're even needing that additional support just to help navigate the system, because it is a complex system. And also, I know that in sometimes working with American families in the US, a lot of times they will look at somebody external because it's one thing, it's one less fight that the family's going to have with the kid. It's like
another sounding board.
My son or daughter won't listen to me, but they will listen to a third party in terms of the application process, or maybe feedback on the essay, or maybe in terms of considering universities in XYZ state, or public or private, or whatever it is. It's just kind of that additional kind of, I guess, tutor is how some people have kind of positioned it as, so that it's an additional body and, an additional voice that isn't the parent, because, these kids are 16, 17 years old, and maybe listening to their parents isn't exactly what they want to be doing in regard to the application process.
Absolutely. And they've got other battles that they need to
prioritize,
right? So that makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah.
To have another sounding board and someone to talk to about it all as well, and give different opinions.
And exactly, an unbiased opinion. If one of the parents maybe went to a smaller liberal arts institution, then they might have a bias on that, which I do have a bias on that because I think they're incredible. But maybe not a bias, but where, or geographically, maybe the parents don't necessarily want them on the other side of the country, or, so it's really about finding the best fit and having that kind of external person give their input on that.
Yeah. And I think from our perspective too, there's, you're doing this once, it's not something that, unless, even if you have, we help families where there's siblings, I can think of one family that we're working with at the moment, and, we've worked with all three of their children, for this process. So, but each one is unique. Each
Completely.
there's not replicated from the other, because it's about that right fit, and because it's a community that you're living on, that residential side, all of those considerations. And then from our perspective too, about being integral from a sporting team, having the relationship with coach, ensuring athletic scholarship is meeting family requirements, all of those things too.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We've been doing this 19 years and no two students are the same. And I'm sure you'll find it as well.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And equally and through the admission process, in terms of who gets accepted from the colleges, it changes too. There's lots of surprises every single year of like, oh, wow, maybe I had a more competitive student the year before that got accepted or didn't get accepted to the XYZ institution. But then this student who was competitive, but maybe not as competitive as a student the year prior, suddenly is extended an offer of admission. So it is constantly changing. And exactly to your point, no two students are alike. And, they may have still undertaken the same idea of courses, but they still are going to bring different opportunities and different perspectives to the college campuses.
So what would you say the biggest challenge is for Australian students? I'm going to talk about what some of the benefits are too. So I'm not just starting on the hard part, but in your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges you see students face?
Through the admission process, you mean, or identifying? The biggest challenges, I think, are being proactive. So because the HSC is so demanding in year 12, as much as you can front load and get done early, the better your students are going to be. So, for example, included within the application at most universities is a personal statement. So the personal statement is something that needs to be written and rewritten and rewritten. It's multi drafts. And I work with students in terms of brainstorming ideas that they might write about, and then work with them through the application process in all components of the application, but including the essay. So, for example, if their applications aren't due until the end of year 12, anywhere from November to December, which would be after they've completed their HSC or IB, they are going to have very little time from mid-year to the start of their HSC. So if they can get as much of their application done in the beginning part of year 12, they're going to be better positioned for the back end of year 12.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I say that to students, ideally, if we can get your essay done by July school holidays, you'll be in a much better spot. And I think everybody works better when they procrastinate, or that seems to be the ongoing trend of a year 12 student.
Yes.
So it's just kind of getting as much done as early as you can is probably the biggest challenge, because, a lot of these things you don't know until you know. You don't know how complex it's going to be, or, how much harder I'm going to make you dig for that personal statement that, you might think it's good, but it's very topical. It's very surface. Like, you need to dig deeper to really get your point across and make yourself be that outstanding student that's going to be different than all of the other applications that are submitted. So I think the biggest challenge, a lot of it is just that time management and getting everything done early. But I guess it is probably reassuring to know that the U.S. kids are going through that same process. There's not an additional process for an international student, but it's the U.S. students are going through that exact same application process.
So that leads me to talk about something that, I think, my son just starting high school this year, in grade 7, and, my awareness, I suppose, shifting, from having a primary school aged, child to high school. And I'm not sure, Debbie, if you've seen any of this. It's been a little bit Queensland focused, but there's an author called Rebecca Sparrow and a journalist called Madonna King. And they're challenging at the moment the QCAA, here in Queensland, about its year 11 and 12 curriculum, in particular with the rigour of it, the fact that they're, in year 11 and 12, some of the assignment work that they're doing is actually third year university level here in Australia. insanity, in my opinion. And I think it's because of, my son going into high school that I know that this is ahead of us, that I'm taking a really keen interest in it. But then also from a Study and Play USA perspective, I'm very familiar with the US university system and the prerequisites. And I guess the point of me raising this is I just wanted to talk about the differences between, high school in the USA and what that means in a broader sense. And because it seems to me that years 9 through to 12 in the US, they're still keeping things nice and broad, not specializing necessarily as much unless you want to be that top academic level Ivy League type scenario, and giving you more time to figure out what you want to study. Is that right?
You mean in the high school level?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always going to be the high school graduation requirements, but in order to be considered at the more selective institutions, you'd be looking to well supersede those general graduation requirements.
Yeah.
I think, so for example, if a student's interested in engineering, it would be expected that they would have high level, physics or honors or AP physics, or and that would be AP or honors are kind of the equivalent. I guess the closest equivalent that we've got here in Australia would be the extension courses. Or the advanced courses. Mm-hmm. So it would be looking at that very high level. So I think they probably specialize less than here in terms of, picking their year 11 and 12 courses, but a lot of it is going to depend on what it is they want to study. Like if it is engineering, that kind of does have its own separate track.
Yes.
I do think the standard of academics and education here in year 11 and 12 is very high. Like it's very rigorous. Mm-hmm. And I think, part of the school profile is, so within the application that a student submits, the high school in which they're attending also needs to submit a school profile. So that is where the admissions team will look at the school profile and get a better understanding of the school. Is it a select school? Is it, what courses do they offer?
Yes.
And that provides context for the admissions team to then assess the student in. So for example, if they didn't take physics, well, maybe it wasn't offered there. So the student's only going to be assessed within the context of what is offered at their school. Right. So I think it kind of depends on what's offered and how competitive they want to be, really.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's slightly left field of, I suppose, what you and I do in our space, but just something that I've been, just keeping an eye on and seeing, the traction that would build.
Yeah. And I do think it is a very high level. Like I think a year 12 student that does well is, the HSC is and IB as well. Obviously, IB is going to be global across the world. But the HSC is a very high level of standard. So that, again, that's where they would look at the school profile. They would look at the Board of Studies to really find out what the inclusions are with, Mass Extension 2 or, whatever it is. But I do think it is very challenging academically here.
Yeah, I agree. So what would be your top tips for navigating admissions, or if there's a few little those 1%ers that our students can do that you've seen can make all the difference, different examples, what would be a few examples of those?
I would say start early, which we already touched on a little bit. And then also just making sure that your application represents you, that it's authentically you. So don't try to follow an area of interest because you think it's going to look good on a U.S. university admissions.
Yeah.
But instead, authentically, what are you interested in? What are you passionate about? What do you want to find out more about? Yeah. So following that interest would be, and again, making sure that it's, something that you are interested in, because having read admissions or applications, it's very evident when a student isn't passionate about something and they've got a smattering of different activities, and then asked to write about a particular activity, they don't really have any substance in that. So, as much as students think, oh, I'm involved in all these different things because I know I need to be, it isn't really necessarily like that.
Yes.
So that would be, the tip would be just kind of following your authentic interest, both extracurriculars as well as academics.
Yes. I would definitely agree on that. I think that for, the study and play pathway with the sport, the student athlete, there's an element of that in talking with a coach as well as with an admissions department, is that, like admissions, coaches are trying to see that you're a good human, you're going to add value to their team culture. For any international, whether you're going as a student athlete, or whatever it might be, for a university to, say, yes, you're coming from the other side of the country and other side of the world, and you're going to bring these great things. You want all different examples, but you do want them to be authentic, like you said. That comes down to your right fit, because if that's not really what you're into or the type of person that you are essentially, then you might not have found your right fit by putting those things forward, what you're looking for or what you're interested in.
Right. And then at the end of the day, you're not going to give your best and they're not going to get their best. So it's,
absolutely.
It's kind of a not win, lose for both.
Yeah.
So I think that authentic piece is definitely critical within the admissions program.
Agree. I think that it's really that it's just a shift, I think, for Australians, and looking at that holistic, it's so outside what we're used to, because you apply to the course at the university and that's it. And that's sort of all you're really looking at, from the US perspective. And the other thing is, there are going to be hundreds of universities that you've never heard of, okay, as an Australian.
Absolutely.
Exceptional academic institutions or powerhouse athletic programs, but, you may not have heard of it because there's, 4,500 plus universities in America. So that's another challenge, I feel, in university. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think exactly another tip would be looking beyond just the name brand, looking beyond what you have heard or maybe what you've seen from, NCAA, either football or basketball or whatever it is. And then also kind of looking also beyond rankings, because just because an institution is highly ranked doesn't mean that you're going to be successful there.
Yes.
And keeping in mind that it's what you do at the university rather than where you do it. So, you could be an absolute powerhouse at one institution and then maybe just be a mainstream kid at another one, so I think a lot of it is in terms of finding your fit. What sort of a student do you want to be? If you're used to being that top 2% at your high school, and then you end up attending an institution that has all top kids, top first, second, and third kids, or top 5% or whatever it is. Not everybody can be that top 5% anymore. And how is that going, how mentally that's a big thing to digest.
Identity, through high school.
Totally.
There's a transition there, right?
So I think that's a piece that a lot of students don't consider, that, that is all about finding the fit of, the lower the acceptance rate. I guess the other thing is that's not a reflection of the quality of the experience that you're going to have or the quality of the education. So just because it's got a low acceptance rate doesn't mean that's going to be any better of an experience, because it's more difficult to get into than an institution that maybe accepts 75% of their students. You can still have an incredible experience at that institution and have an absolutely amazing academic experience as well. So I think that's another tip, I guess, going back on that, is not interchanging the acceptance rate for the type of experience that you're going to have, because they are not directly related.
Yes. And I liken finding your right fit from a US college on a smaller scale to Australians finding their right fit in high school. Because if I talk, and I'm talking personally again about trying to find, when my son is in grade 3 trying to figure out, okay, what is he into?
High school.
What would be the best thing, is that you need to find somewhere that has, all different opportunities so that when you do find where your passion lies, because by the end of year 12, not everybody knows.
Right.
Actually, I'm going to challenge that and say nobody knows who they want to be. Nobody knows where they're going to land in life or where certain interests are going to take them, and it's the same when choosing a high school here in Australia, is that you're looking at what opportunity could be there for you should you decide to do this or this or this, knowing that you have a general idea of what your son or daughter is into. So I think university is different here, that we don't take that whole look at it. It's about just the course.
Yes.
Not anything else.
Yes.
So I think that's the similar. And similar, from a sporting perspective, is you look at the GPS competition in the Australian high schools and school sport. College sport is that, but on steroids. Just an entirely different scale.
Yep. Yes, exactly. And kind of to your point about going into university, I think the university system in the U.S. is kind of set up for that student that doesn't know. Like, we welcome students to not know what they want to do, which is complete contrast to the education, the university system here.
Yeah.
So we thrive on the fact that you don't know what you want to do when you get to university, because that's kind of that whole point of those first couple of years of exploratory studies, or, the liberal arts foundation, and taking an array of different courses that will not only round you well in a number of different academic areas, but it'll also allow you to more confidently decide on what it is that you want to study, because you will have undertaken those courses at a university level.
Yes, absolutely. So that's those electives that you get to choose, and you don't necessarily have to declare your major.
Right.
And I would say at least 50% of the student athletes that we work with are going with an undecided or an undeclared major.
Great. That's good.
Highly appropriate in the American university.
Absolutely. Yep. And even on that note, those that do declare, I think the statistic is something like 80% of students change their major upon arrival. So you might apply as a psychology major, but you might shift to business, or it might be, vice versa.
Yeah.
The predominant exception is if you're going to study engineering. Most times you do need to declare that at point of admission.
Yes.
Because it has less electives and you kind of just need to get going on your STEM courses. But like, that is kind of the, the chalk and cheese of the education system between the US and Australia, is that we welcome the fact that you might not know what you want to study. And that's kind of the whole point of going to university, so you can learn about a number of different things before you then focus in on that area of study third and fourth year.
Yeah, I love that. I think.
So do I.
Yeah, I really do. I think it's so healthy, and the amount of students where they're sitting in our office, talking. We've got mum and dad there, sitting there talking about what US college could look like for them, and they're when we're able to share with them that you don't have to know what you want to study, you should see the sheer relief. Because it's from grade 9 onwards, it's what do you want to be? What are you going to study? What are you going to study? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And it's this pressure to know. You don't get more time to go and figure that out.
Right. And I think, exactly. And I think, a lot of times I tell families that it allows you to make those big decisions later, where here you're kind of needing to make those big decisions in year 10, because you've got to pick your year 11 and 12 courses, and then, drive the pathway in which you want to be going for university. Whereas you don't have to decide your major at most institutions until after your second year, or midway through your second year, for example. Again, with it, there are some exceptions, but, so it allows you to make a far more educated decision, which is a massive decision. What is it that you want to study? Yeah. So it allows you to have more tools under your belt to make that decision. And you're older, and you've also done a smattering of different subjects to really more confidently go, I thought I wanted philosophy, but it's actually not what I thought it was. Or I thought I wanted political science, but it turns out I don't like the history piece of it, or whatever it is. That you can make that decision based with, having had more information. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's one of my there's so much, I'm so passionate about this pathway for so many reasons. But But that has to be one of the top ones that Chris and I and our team speak about all the time, is and seeing, you know, the pressure that our kids go through here, you know, within our high school system. I just think that that's done a bit better over there.
Yeah.
In my humble opinion.
Yeah. Like, and you know, on that note, I kind of say with families that, you know, the workforce is changing, and any university globally will tell you that they're preparing students for a workforce that nobody really knows what it looks like. So if you can kind of have a foundation of a number of different areas before you focus, I think that will serve you better than if you exclusively studied a particular area of, you know, subject matter, you know, extensively for 3 years. So I think it's kind of that adaptability. And a lot of times we say the US education system teaches you how to think and think outside the box and work with others, and, you know, kind of pulling all of those multi and interdisciplinary pieces of residential living and all of those things. Internships, study abroad opportunity, you know, kind of all of those to then come up with the end result. I think it serves students well and prepares them well to have a bit of a foundation of a number of different subjects under their belt.
Agreed. And I think that regardless, and I have said this to Chris, is that regardless of our son's athletic level as to whether sport is even on his radar, you know, I just think from that whole, you know, living on campus, you know, the maturity, the confidence, the life experience that going to college in America, even as a student, let's take away the athletic side of it, you know, I think is life-changing and something, you know, without telling him what to do, it's his decision, but gosh, I love it. I just think it'd be so good for him.
Right. Yep, exactly. I mean, that growth point from, you know, starting from your year 12 to your freshman year, your first year at uni is like significant. And then it just kind of keeps, you know, it's expedited throughout your whole process. You know, you might choose to live off campus on your third and fourth years, and, you know, it's still an added level of independence than what you had your first year. Maybe you were in the dorms your first year, which is, you know, highly recommended, particularly as a new student. So it's, you know, that significant growth piece from a student, you know, from just an individual growth, you know, and kind of becoming, I guess, more of a mature person and managing things on your own. But from a parent perspective, still having that oversight from a university, and there's, you know, public health, and there's, you know, there's security, and, you know, there's all of those kind of checks and balances that as a parent you're going to want to see. So they're independent on the one breath, but equally, you know, there's still university oversight, and that makes it a bit
entirely free into the world.
Yes, a bit more of a confident transition than if your student just turned up in LA and, you know, was looking for an apartment by themselves. Kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, thank you, Debbie. I have really, really enjoyed our chat. I always do, but it's nice to have one recorded officially to everyone else to hear all of our chit chat about the admission space and just, US college in general. So, really appreciate you taking the time. And I think it's been really insightful to hear. You know, we obviously are talking often about the sporting space as well, you know, within US college, but just to hear, you know, purely from an admissions point of view and what colleges look for, and with your experience in that, it's just, I think this is a tremendous, you know, this podcast will be a tremendous asset to our study and play family. So thank you.
No worries. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem.